So welcome everyone to the Franklin Park Bear Dens meeting number 2. I'm Amy Lene, project manager from the Boston Parks and Recreation Department overseeing this project. I do want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We really do appreciate giving time from your schedule to be here, especially on a lovely spring evening like this. Next slide, please. So I just have a few things to go over before we start the presentation. Please know that this meeting is being recorded. That way it can be posted to the project webpage for anyone who would like to view it again or share with neighbors who were unable to attend. We'll add the link to the project webpage in the chat, or feel free to access it through the QR code on the screen or the link shown here. The recording should be posted in about a week. And then during the presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and your microphone muted. And during the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. Next slide, please. We hope everyone will feel comfortable sharing their questions and comments. Please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. We do ask that questions and comments be kept to 2 minutes so that we can hear from everyone. I do want to note that we are unable to discuss the White Stadium project due to pending litigation, so we just ask that conversation stays focused on the Bear Dens project. I think we have maybe someone who's on, there we go. You're welcome to reach out to me via email if you would like to provide project comments or you think of questions after the meeting. And my email is on this slide, but we'll also add it to the chat. The next slide, thanks. So in a moment, our design team will give a short presentation followed by a listening and discussion session. If a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll address it after the presentation. If you'd like to speak during the discussion session and you're joining via Zoom on a computer, just use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. If anyone is calling in from a phone, just use *9 to raise your hand. And once we call on you, *6 to unmute and to mute again. Next slide, please. So we'll start with an introduction of the project team, and then our design team will go over the project status and scope of work, and then present the recommendations for safety improvements. This will be followed by a listening and discussion session, and then closing remarks and next steps. So next slide, please. So once again, I'm Amy Lene, project manager from Boston Parks. Also joining us is Lauren Bryant, project manager from Boston Parks, project manager for the Franklin Park Action Plan. Quanah Wise, director of community engagement for the Environment, Energy, and Open Space Cabinet at the city, is also joining us. I do want to thank Tammy Pierre-Louis from Boston Parks, our outreach coordinator, who's moderating for us tonight. We've been working with our local liaisons from the Office of Neighborhood Services to coordinate these meetings, and they're a great resource for all community concerns. And then Kyle Zick Landscape Architecture is the design consultant on this project. So joining us tonight, we have Kyle Zick and Mike Doucette. I do want to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on the call, and just ask that you raise your hand if you would like to say something at this time. Okay. And next slide, please. So in addition to the Office of Neighborhood Services, this is a list of groups that we have coordinated with on this project. Next slide. So our project schedule, this is the second meeting for the Bear Den Safety Improvements Project. We'll be sharing the recommendations for improvements to the site, and then we'll take any comments from the community. Then during the next couple months, the design team will develop the construction documents, and we expect to bid the project in late May, and anticipate starting construction this summer. We are in the process of transferring the care and custody of the property from the state to the city. So this construction start will be contingent on that going through. And with that, I will turn it over to Kyle from KZLA.
Thanks, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, I'm Kyle Zick. I'm a landscape architect with Kyle Zick Landscape Architecture. My company is the design consultant for the project, but we can't do this alone because the project is fairly specialized. So while the landscape architects in my office will do a lot of work, we also have Silman structural engineers. We have preservation consultants, building conservation associates. Site survey was done by Niche Engineering, and we did a 3D laser scan of all the bear dens area by ScanShore. So what does this project include? We were asked to analyze the existing conditions and make recommendations to improve the bear dens related to safety and stabilization of historic features. What are we trying to do tonight? We want to summarize the safety issues that we presented in meeting 1, share recommendations for addressing those safety issues and prioritizing improvements, and share how the recommended improvements fit within the construction budget. So we're going to use certain diagrams to describe the bear dens. So I just want to get you oriented to those. This is a plan view, just for you all know this space, but Seaver Street is on the right-hand side of this image. The stairs, which would lead you up to the plaza that connects to 3 of the bear cages, is shown here. Now we're going to refer to the cages by number, and this is how the zoo actually referred to them. So if you're at the top of the plaza, to your left is cage number 1. Then there's a gap in the cages, and you have cage 2. Cage 2 is the one that has the City of Boston logo and the bears. And then cage 3 is to the right. And then if you went back down the stairs and up the path, that's cage number 4. We also are going to use 3-dimensional graphics in this. So same idea, but you start to see the heights and some of what some of these components look like. So here are the stairs, the plaza, pool number, cage number 1, where that has a pool, walls, and fencing. And then cage 2 and 3 are connected, each with a pool, fencing, and the walls. And then cage 4 with the fencing and the pool and the walls. And then of course we have the stairs and the benches. Just to backtrack a little bit, and to understand where we are. So this is a 1925 plan by the landscape architect Arthur Shercliffe showing expansion for the zoo, but it gives you some orientation for today. Blue Hill Ave is on the right-hand side, and Seaver Street is on the top, and Walnut to the left. What you think of as the zoo today is what I'm circling now. And the bear dens are out here in Long Crouch Woods on the left-hand side of this drawing. As I mentioned, we're referring to the cages by cage number because the documentation is so good. We actually know what species of bear were in each cage. So brown bears in cage 1, and the photos correlate to each one of these. So cage 2, the Russian brown bears, cage 3, black bears, and cage 4, polar bears. The Franklin Park Action Plan definitely had recommendations for the bear dens and envisioned flexible use and new programming. That's definitely, none of this changes with our project. Our project is just making it safe in the interim, and anything we do won't preclude those future uses, which will be determined later. We've done a fairly thorough site inventory with our landscape architects, structural engineer, and preservation consultants. So we've looked at pavement, stairs, seat walls, fences, masonry walls, vegetation, all these things to make sure we have a comprehensive understanding of the bear dens and what all the safety issues are. And what are those? So each one of the bear dens has a pool that used to be full of water, but now is a fall hazard. There are holes in the concrete pavement in each one of the exhibits that you could trip, twist an ankle, get hurt on. The fencing used to have a steel cap on it, a ridge to that was part of the security measure, but it is rusted and is not secure in all the places. There are old utility structures that have no covers that are a fall hazard, and there are tripping hazards from raised elements that are in the exhibits. And then there's stabilization issues too. They're not necessarily safety issues now, but we don't want these issues to get worse. So in cage 4, you have a place where the concrete cap of the wall meets the metal cap of the wall. And right at that spot, which this photo that I'm highlighting now in the upper right highlights, is where water gets in here. and then that water gets into the wall and you start to see this kind of cracking. In addition to this issue, we suspect that the left-hand side of this wall is resting on ledge, pudding stone, and the right-hand side is not. So that's accentuating some of that settlement. Then at each one of the exhibit spaces, we have a cap with these metal bayonets. That's how they referred to them in the historic drawings. But the concrete cap is degraded badly in some locations, and we don't want that to fail. One, because it'll allow more water into the wall. And then also we may start to lose the bayonets, another historic feature. So then we're gonna get specific by cage. So cage 1, if you're at the top of the, go up the stairs to your left is cage number 1. And so what are the issues? And some of these will be repetitive, but I'll point out the unique ones as well. So here we have limited access in and out of this enclosure. So if you're a visitor here, you come through the opening here, or maybe you went through what was an old gate, but then you could feel trapped if someone else came behind you. There is a small opening over where these people are in the photo, but there's a comfort level that could be an issue here. We also have a fall hazard with the old pool. The fence cap is a lot of deterioration, and sheet metal and plate metal is falling. There's tripping hazards in the pavement and also around the curb. And there's fence posts that were cut off that actually stick up that are an issue. And then the missing fence panels, I've talked about the access, but the fact that this is missing and the gates are missing is a concern. And then there's graffiti and covering up of the graffiti that is something that we've looked at. So then we'll look at this in 3 dimensions, and we've color coded this with 3 colors very deliberately to try to explain if there's safety issues, stabilization issues, and what would fit into the budget that we have. So we're still at cage 1. And as I pointed out, there's one way into the space now, which is this missing panel, and then there's the missing gates. So the light blue are priority 1 improvements to make things safe. So everything that's in this light blue, these labels in the light blue boxes and what's highlighted in the drawing. And I'll go through these starting on the right and move to the left, and then we'll go to priority 2 and priority 3. So some of the things we're concerned about from a safety perspective are the stability of that metal cap that is rusting and falling off, so we can remove what's loose or replace it. These fence post bases that have been cut off above ground that you could trip on or fall on, we can cut flush with the concrete. We can fill the concrete vault, the utility vault that you could fall into, and we can repair the missing or loose stones in that bench so that no one falls down onto the ledge. There's a curb here that has protruding steel reinforcing. That isn't a concern. And then I think we would like to remove one of the fence panels so that you have more than one way in or out of this space. And then we would temporarily fill the pool with gravel so there's no fall hazard, but that gravel could be removed later if it were determined there was another use for that pool. So those are the safety issues. Then the priority 2 stabilization issues are really related to making sure the masonry cap on top of the stone walls is intact and doesn't allow water into the walls. Beyond that, we have the priority 3, which would be repairing the capstone around the pool, removing graffiti, or the minor repairs to the concrete pavement on the ground surface. And then also painting the fence or the bayonets. So that's almost the dividing line of what will get funded in this project. Priority 1 and 2, we feel fairly comfortable will fit into the budget. And then priority 3, we won't be painting the fence or the bayonets or removing graffiti. So then we shift to cage 2. This is, you can, to orient yourself, here's the City of Boston logo with the bears, and that's directly ahead of you as you come up the stairs. So what's different or unique? What issues are unique at cage 2 versus cage 1? There are the curb that's dividing between cage 2 and 3 that's raised, and some of it's loose, so that's a tripping hazard. We have a tree cage that protected a live tree that was in the bear exhibit that's loose, and actually there's a hole in the fence that you can get in there. And we do have multiple holes in the pavement that are tripping hazards. And there are some other things that were common to cage number 1 as well. The failing fence canopy, graffiti, and the remnant fence posts out here, and the utility structures that you could fall into, as well as the pool. As we shift right to cage 3, which is connected to cage 2, highlighted here in this locus map, you have a lot of the same issues: the failing fence canopy and graffiti, the curb dividing the cages, the remnant fence posts out here, and the fall hazard into the pool. What's unique is that we have one fence panel that's definitely loose, some others that have some connections that could be tightened. And we have some of the intact fence cap that is here, but it's loose and has some concerns. So as we show a diagram for cage 2 and 3, it's highlighted the same way, with the light blue being the make safe, priority 1, that light green is priority 2 and stabilization, and then the lowest priority, priority 3, being the dark green. And I'll start on the right-hand side. But here's cage 2 that has the Boston logo and the bears. This is the divider between cage 2 and cage 3. And the stairs are here with the benches off to the right. So there's holes in the stairs that we can repair so that that's not a tripping hazard. This bench actually has a lot of issues. The bench is actually the masonry, the granite pieces have fallen. So that would be repaired. These circles shown in the plaza are where there used to be trees. So we would fill those in with pavement so there's no tripping hazard. The fence posts that I mentioned at cage 1, we would also cut flush so they're not a hazard and fill those utility vaults. The fencing has some of the same issues. We would secure or remove any of the loose fence cap, the metal, and secure that tree cage that's loose and has a hole in the cage itself. Fill each one of the 2 pools with gravel, remove the raised curb between the 2 cages so that that's not a tripping hazard, and then fill in the holes in the pavement. The stabilization or preservation issues are again related to repairing the masonry cap on top of the wall so we can stop water intrusion and protect those bayonets, those metal spikes. And then priority 3 would include repairing the capstone around the edge of those pools, removing graffiti, and the minor repairs in the pavement in those each of the cages, and painting of any of the metal components. So cage 4, we've shifted. So if we've come down the stairs up the path, it's the cage that's off to the side. This is where the polar bears were. Cage 4 is a little different. One, because almost all of the fencing is intact. One panel's missing and one gate over here. And the cap on top of the fence is intact, although there are some stability issues that can be addressed. Inside the cage, we feel there are some unique safety issues that are more difficult to address. If we were to allow people to enter this, we're concerned about the deep pool, which we could fill, but the very steep pavement, there's really not a good solution for us to address that safety concern. There's a tree cage here that we would have to address, and there's also a lot of holes in the pavement here that we would have to improve. So what is our approach here? It's a little bit different than cages 1 through 3. Here, because of the unique conditions inside of this cage, we feel like we should replace the missing fence panel and the gate to secure this cage and not have public access. That, prevents some of the safety issues, but also it shows a model of what one of the intact exhibit spaces looked like. So people could understand it better, and then we don't have to fill in the pool or address some of the holes in the pavement or the steepness in the fall hazard with the slippery pavement surface. We would still address the stubs of the fence posts out here and do whatever repairs were necessary to secure that intact fence cap. And then as a priority 2, again, address the capstone on top of the walls, but unique to this one, we would do some stabilization with grout injection and resetting of stones where that wall has settled. And then we would actually remove the graffiti here because without public access, we wouldn't expect that we would have more graffiti issues in the future. I've already mentioned some of the plaza and stair issues that connect cages 1, 2, and 3, but I'll show some of the images here. Some of these circular tree pits where there are no longer trees, we will pave those so that they're not a hazard. There's these voids where the stair tread meets the riser that we will repair and fill in. There were actually trees growing in some of the stairs, so we'll address that grade change and the tripping hazard. And I mentioned earlier where the benches are falling apart, the stones have fallen down the hill. We can put those back together and make this safe. There's a few other issues around the site. If you were behind cage 3, Seaver Street is shown here to the right. There's a pretty good drop from the cross-country track and where maintenance vehicles come through down to the sidewalk. And there's also areas you could climb out on the ledge that previously had metal posts and some kind of fencing to prevent falling down the ledge. But this area along Seaver Street, we think there should be some kind of fencing, try to make it as transparent, as light as possible. There's ledge in this area, so a steel post that we could anchor into the ledge if we encounter it, but then some thin steel cables, multiple cables, maybe 4 or 6, that would prevent access down the fall down to the sidewalk. So then kind of a bit of a recap showing the images of cage 1, 2, and 3, and 4 all together, highlighting the different priorities. The light blue again are the safety improvements, priority 1. So addressing the stability of the fencing and filling in holes and fall hazards at each one of the cages. And as I mentioned, cage 4 is a little bit different where we'll secure the cage. The second priority are more of the masonry concerns, making sure that we cap the wall appropriately and don't allow water to get in. And then the miscellaneous improvements included some of the graffiti removal in number 4, but some of the invasive vegetation removal as well. So how does this all then get tallied up and relate to the cost estimate and our budget? So all the things our design team inventoried and recommended totaled almost $1 million, which is more than the construction budget of $720,000. So that's why we were thinking about priorities and different buckets of make safe would have a certain amount of money. Well, let me explain it differently. So then we have to try to figure out what fits within the $720,000. We want to prioritize the things that make it safe. Those things totaled up to almost $300,000 that address the tripping hazards, the pavement repair, the stair and the seat wall issues, and infilling the pools. Then when we get to the stabilization issues, the wall repairs, the wall cap, that's almost $400,000. So then there's a little bit more money left to do some of the priority 3, and that would include the graffiti removal in cage 4 and some of the invasive vegetation removal. The things that wouldn't fit in this budget, they're above this line. That's graffiti removal in cage 1, 2, 3, because those are still open to the public. We're going to expect that that's going to continue to happen until there's more activation here. The painting of the metal fence and the bayonets, and that includes the preparation of removing the rust on those fences. So not too much doesn't make the cut, but all the things that are very important to achieve the goals of the project do make the cut. So thanks so much for allowing me to kind of get through that. We're happy now to listen to your comments or your questions.
Thanks, Kyle. I just wanted to let everybody know, as a reminder from what Amy said, we're here to discuss the bear dens tonight. And unfortunately, we're not able to discuss anything about White Stadium due to the ongoing litigation. But we did want to make sure that you guys know that there is a website for White Stadium. And on that website, there are question and answer fact sheets. There are places that you can sign up to be on their mailing list, and also an email address that you can send questions to. So I will drop that website. Oh, Amy already did. Perfect. So just wanted to make sure that we let you guys know that that information is out there, even though we can't discuss it tonight. And that we know that there are a lot of people on the call and we want to respect everybody's time. So we do want to limit questions and comments to 2 minutes each. And with that, I will turn it back over to Amy to open it up for discussion.
Great. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Kyle. So we'd love to hear any comments that you all have. I think there's a few in the chat about sort of a back and forth on the purpose of providing additional egress out of the cages. And I think that's something that we saw as a a safety issue and wanted to at least, you know, allow for 2 points for someone to leave a cage, the cage, you know, for various reasons. So that was something we've heard, I think, both from the community and also in internal discussions. Let's see, Christine, thanks for your question about graffiti, putting something on the masonry walls to prevent the graffiti from sticking. I don't know if Kyle, if you've had experience with that. I think the cost, there is the cost of cleaning everything off, but before we could use that, so.
There is, so yes, if we were to remove the paint covering up graffiti and the graffiti and get back to the original stone, you can put a sacrificial coating on top of the stone that makes it easier to remove the graffiti. But you would have to, after you remove the graffiti, you have to reapply that coating. So it's not simple, but it does make the graffiti removal easier.
And Kyle, am I correct that sometimes with natural stone, that coating can also change the color of the stone when it's applied? Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, and we have a question about issues with the dens themselves, the buildings that are behind the cages, that are in need of attention from a safety or preservation perspective. I think there's certainly work that could happen there. I guess in just to reiterate or to sort of refresh what we talked about in meeting 1, these improvements are really kind of what we're calling the short-term, sort of most, you know, urgent improvements, but there's a goal then to do another capital project, do something more significant in the future, and that's probably at least 5 years out. So the idea would be that with this project, the space would become safer and more usable, and then we can start thinking about you know, interesting programming for the space. So I think I would imagine that maybe those spaces, those dens at the back can be addressed in that project, but for this project we'll just keep them closed off.
And Amy, to address the comment about the bear dens themselves, we did review those, and the structure, the roof and the walls are all solid. There's some removal of moss and vegetation that we could do that would help preserve the concrete. And there's one enclosure that has bars, all the rest have been blocked in. So we would look at this, we're looking at the stability of those bars to see if we need to do anything else, or if we wanted to block those in because trash does get thrown into those enclosures because it's open.
Okay, Jacob, I see your question about hiring artists to make better graffiti. I think we may run into issues with promoting graffiti on those walls, but I think the idea of, you know, public art and some sort of installation in this space is a good one, and that's something that, you know, I hope there will be future discussions about and opportunities for that, because I think there's a lot of potential there for activation. Jesse, a comment about gravel being some people tossing the gravel around and that being an issue. Kyle, do you have thoughts on that? Have you seen that as a concern?
Yeah, I think there will be some of that. It's going to be small gravel that isn't much fun to throw, and I don't think would be hazardous. But it's one of those materials that it's a pretty good compromise for all the different things we're trying to do. One, we're trying to fill in the space. There are other materials we could consider, but sand, you know, probably isn't the right choice because of animals, and, you know, the hygiene. We talked about using, you know, a wood structure, but it's a lot more expensive. So it's one of those things that it solves some of the issues, but we know there's still going to be maybe some minor issues with that material choice.
Kyle, there's another question about the stairs. Would it be possible to just maybe jump back to that slide and share again what we're doing on the stairs for the repairs there?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll show this photo first. So the issue with the stairs is that if you can see my hand here, I'm highlighting, and there's a dark shadow line there. That's actually a hole that goes pretty far down and to the sides. So we're going to patch this hole so that no one can get a foot or fingers or anything like that stuck there, and limits water getting in here, which makes which accelerates the deterioration of the materials. I mean, the good thing is, you know, having a preservation consultant look at this is 100-year-old concrete stairs are in very good shape for their age. So by addressing this now really should kind of stem the issues. And we will patch these to try to color match this and texture match this as best as possible, acknowledging that, you know, we have to tint the concrete and pick the right stones to try to make it match something that's weathered 100 years. But we've done that at Jamaica Pond and other places and been pretty successful. We'll also clean the stairs before that. So that, you know, some of the moss and debris and dirt will be removed to try to make one that adhere better, but then make the match better. In addition to that, there's where the stairs meet the walls, there's some gaps that we would fill in. And then there used to be trees that were growing inside the structure of the stairs. This is at the very bottom of the stairs on the right. We would fill this in so that it's not an unusual step or a tripping hazard.
Thanks, Kyle. Let's see, Christine, your question about could trees be planted in the pools? The hesitancy there is that we're trying to do something that is temporary and could be removed in the future when there's more funding to do something here. And I think if we plant trees, we're at risk of, you know, we're not necessarily going to be able to easily just remove those. So I think we're hesitant to put in trees in areas at the site where something else might want to go in the future, since we're really trying to not, you know, take trees out. So something that we want to keep it something that can be undone in the future relatively easily. And I think there was another question about coating it with something, but I think the risk, like a thin layer of cement, I think that would be problematic, and that it would crack, and then it would become actually a little bit less stable than the gravel. I think there's some issues there. Let's see, Joshua, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Wondering if there's been any thought to interpretive or signs that might talk a little bit about the history of the space, and if there's any, I don't know if that's something that comes later on, but how it connects with the history of the zoo. Has there been any discussion about that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we've certainly discussed that. I think signage in general is something that the larger action plan is looking at, and improvements, but I think there's certainly a compelling reason to have something specific to the bear dens that shows a lot of like the history that we've shared tonight. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, Joshua, it's a great question because absolutely there is so much great history there. So I think what would probably happen is anything like a permanent interpretive signage would probably be part of that next phase of the bear dens when we're, rediscovering what this space might be or programming it in a different way, as opposed to part of the Make Safe project, which is what we're doing now. But absolutely, it would be a great idea to have that once we reimagine what this space can be.
Lauren. So a question about Future Friends group, when it's safer, they can have volunteer days concentrating on graffiti and litter and debris removal, as well as keeping invasive plants in check. I think there's certainly great opportunities there for volunteers. I think the Emerald Necklace Conservancy has done some volunteer invasive removal. So I think that's certainly on the table. You know, happy to coordinate with people on that. I think, Christine, if you have info on what Franklin Park Coalition has done anything there specifically, or we can connect you all. Kevin, I see your question about the transfer of care and custody from the state. So from what I'm told, it is moving along. I think the state is certainly happy to transfer that back to us. Still in the city's ownership currently, but just the care and custody piece of it is what's being transferred. So I'm optimistic that that won't impact our schedule negatively, but I'll certainly let you all know as we hear updates on it. I think it's certainly in the works, so I understand it's been a long time coming. Sandy, will the space be blocked off for this work? And will signs tell people what's going on? Yeah, so when we do construction projects, our contractor will put up construction fencing so that people aren't moving into those areas. And we do have some signage, temporary signage that goes up to just let people know that it's a capital project, you know, who they can reach out to with questions. And then Ricky, the timeline for the work, I'm sorry, I think that you said that directly to me, but I'll just respond to that. So we do, well, we can go back maybe to the schedule slide just to give us a visual. So our design team will move into the construction documentation this spring. The project will go out to bid in May. That's the goal. I should say we expect it to go out to bid in May. And then construction is anticipated to start in July. And I think we're probably assuming maybe 8 months. Kyle, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I like to be realistic about that time frame, but
I think it depends when they start and if we have to stop for the winter.
Yeah, some of the work will certainly be, I think, weather dependent. So yeah, that's maybe, let's say like probably spring of 2025 is maybe realistic. Christine commented that the Franklin Park Coalition does a community fall and spring volunteer day. So that's helpful to know. Thanks. Question about landmarks. So yeah, we did have a preliminary meeting with landmark staff, and then we will be at their meeting on the 26th, I believe. Yeah, 26th. We anticipate it will just go through. They've told us it should just be an administrative approval, so that's moving forward. Let's see, Sandy's question about approaching the state for funding. I think, Sandy, I know we've had some emails about this, and that's something that I would certainly recommend as constituents of your state, you know, reps and senators, that communicating that to them would be really helpful. You know, I think that's the way to sort of leverage funding if possible. I don't know if that timing would work for this project because we're really just, you know, months away from starting. But I think that it could certainly be utilized, for future work. There's plenty of work to be done here. So I would encourage that if you have the time to reach out to them. That could be really great. Okay, Ronald, do you have a question? Hand up. Are you able to unmute, Ronald?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah, two questions: handicap accessibility and the pool fill. Can it be filled and then covered with the materials that they use at the kids' playgrounds? That softer stuff. Did that go out?
Kyle, do you want to answer? Do you want to take this one?
Sure. So, so if the material you're talking about, rubber surfacing, safety surfacing for playgrounds, it could definitely be done. The issue is cost, because it's about $25 a square foot. So that would add up very quickly and take away from something else that would have been in the budget.
Okay. All right.
Then you also asked about accessibility,
Oh,
right?
handicap accessibility.
Yeah, sorry. So I know Boston Parks has already talked to the Boston Disabilities Commission about this project. In terms of, it's a make safe project. It's not trying to activate the space. So we're addressing safety issues, holes, tripping hazards, which are improvements for accessibility, but we're not creating an accessible route to the site or to the different cages.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Something that, again, in the future project we would anticipate addressing, but given the budget for this, it's not really feasible, because a pretty significant portion of ramp, I think, that would come up the back or sloped walkway, but really the cost for that would be outside of this budget. But we anticipate submitting a temporary variance for that, or I guess they call it a time variance, so that knowing that we plan to do those accessibility improvements in the future, but just not as this current part of this current project. But that's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
And then Ricky asked about CPA funds. I think it's something that we could consider going forward right now because of the timing. I think this current money that we have to work with, I guess the CPA funding wouldn't be available for, a year or more than a year from now if we applied in the next round. So I think for that, something we'd consider for the future project, but at this point, just working with what capital funding we have available. And then we have a question about growing plants in the pool spaces.
And that is something we've talked about internally, because we could have gravel fill to a certain depth and then bring in topsoil and grow grass or annuals or something that wasn't permanent. So then it's just a matter of, will it hold up? And can it be redone if it's an annual? Could it be replanted each year until the more permanent solution is done? So I think it's something to consider.
Yeah, and I think the gravel infill doesn't preclude that from happening in the future. It's sort of the manpower needed to maintain it. So I think if that's something that community members are organized and interested in doing, it's certainly not out of the question. Okay, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to let us know, but I also want you to feel free to send me an email if you think of something later. And like I said, we'll post this recording of this meeting as well as the slides. So if you do want to revisit any of the information, it'll be on that project webpage. And great. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it and taking the time to come here tonight. So hope you all have a nice rest of your evening.